For years, India has been presented as a rising military power, a country finally stepping onto the global stage with elite Western weapons. The symbol of that rise was the Rafale fighter jet. Sleek, expensive, and marketed as one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, it became a source of national pride. Many believed it placed India in the same league as top air forces. But reality has a way of crashing into narratives. Along India's borders, a very different picture has emerged. Reports and claims of repeated air incidents began to surface. Indian aircraft allegedly shot down. Not outdated planes, but frontline fighters. Even the Rafale, the so-called crown jewel of India's Air Force, was suddenly part of uncomfortable conversations. This wasn't just about hardware, it was psychological. When a jet that costs tens of millions of dollars fails to dominate, it doesn't just damage equipment, it damages confidence. The idea that expensive means superior starts to crack. Pilots begin to hesitate, commanders become cautious, and rivals take notice. What made this even more shocking was who these incidents involved. Not a superpower air force, not a futuristic stealth fleet, but Pakistan's J-10 and JF-17 fighters, aircraft often dismissed as cheaper, simpler, and inferior. So this is the mystery at the heart of this story. How did one of the world's most expensive fighter jets fail against aircraft that were supposed to be second-rate? Before these incidents, the Rafale wasn't just an aircraft in India, it was a symbol. On social media, in TV debates, and across defense forums, the Rafale was treated almost like a miracle weapon. Supporters claimed it could dominate Pakistan's air force effortlessly. Some even argued it could stand up to China's stealth fighter, the J-20. A simple belief drove all of this confidence: price equals power. If a fighter jet costs far more than its rivals, it must be better. That idea sounds logical, like assuming a luxury car must always outperform a budget one. But warfare doesn't work like car commercials. Reality started leaking in through military exercises and joint drills. When Pakistan trained with Middle Eastern air forces, or when J-10s faced Western-designed fighters in controlled environments, the results were quietly uncomfortable. The J-10 repeatedly held its ground, and sometimes outperformed aircraft that were supposed to be superior. These outcomes were inconvenient, so they were dismissed. Indian commentators called them rumors, biased reports, or propaganda. After all, how could a Chinese-built jet flown by Pakistan possibly challenge a French fighter that cost several times more? That dismissal became a pattern. Warning signs were ignored because they didn't fit the story people wanted to believe. But battlefields don't care about online confidence or national pride. When real confrontations began replacing simulations, denial became harder to maintain. And that's the turning point in this story, because once reality breaks through hype, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly was the Rafale missing that its cheaper rivals seemed to have? That question leads us straight into the technology behind modern air combat. To understand why these outcomes weren't accidents, we need to reset how we think about air combat. Many people still imagine dogfights, two pilots spotting each other, turning hard, and relying on skill and courage. That image is outdated. Modern air combat is decided long before pilots ever see one another. The biggest change is missiles and sensors. Take the PL-15 air-to-air missile used by the J-10. Its defining advantage isn't speed or size, it's range and guidance. The missile can be launched from far beyond visual range, guided by advanced radar and data links, and adjusted mid-flight. In simple terms, it allows the pilot to shoot first, from farther away, with a higher chance of hitting the target. Now compare that to older assumptions. If one aircraft detects the other first, locks on first, and fires first, the rest of the fight is mostly academic. The opposing pilot may never even know what hit them. Skill matters, but only after technology allows you to survive long enough to use it. Radar plays a critical role here. Modern fighters don't just see, they track, prioritize, and share targets. A jet with better radar can act like someone with night vision goggles fighting someone in the dark. The fight is unfair before it begins. This is why cheaper aircraft are no longer automatically inferior. If their sensors, missiles, and electronic systems are newer or better integrated, they can dominate older or more expensive platforms. Cost does not guarantee advantage, systems do. Once you understand this shift, the Rafale's struggles start to make sense. The issue wasn't bravery, it wasn't pilot quality. It was that the battlefield itself had changed, and some air forces adapted faster than others. But this raises an even deeper question. Why were some countries able to build these advanced systems at scale, while others could not? To answer that, we have to look beyond aircraft and into materials, factories, and power grids. At this point, it's clear the gap isn't just about pilots or tactics. It's about something far less visible, the materials inside the machines. One material in particular quietly changed modern air combat: gallium nitride, often shortened to GAN. Think of radar like a flashlight in the dark. Older radars are like weak bulbs. They heat up quickly and can't shine very far without burning out. Gallium nitride radars, by contrast, are like high-powered LED floodlights. They can push much more energy, handle far more heat, and stay on longer without failing. This matters because stronger radar means earlier detection. Earlier detection means earlier missile launches, and earlier launches usually decide who lives and who doesn't. GAN radars outperform older gallium arsenide radars in several key ways. Higher power output, which increases detection range. Better heat tolerance, allowing continuous operation. Stronger resistance to electronic jamming, making them harder to blind. And more compact size, letting aircraft carry more capability without extra weight. In simple terms, GAN turns radar from a support tool into a weapon. But here's the part most discussions skip. You can't just decide to build gallium nitride systems. Gallium isn't mined like iron or copper. It's a rare byproduct of aluminum refining. That means supply depends on massive industrial processes, reliable electricity, advanced chemistry, and skilled engineers. Producing GAN components is slow, expensive, and extremely demanding. It requires stable power grids, ultra-clean factories, and deep experience in semiconductor manufacturing. That's why only a handful of countries can do it at scale. This is where the story stops being about jets and starts being about industrial civilization. Countries with deep manufacturing bases can turn rare materials into advanced weapons consistently. Countries without that base struggle, no matter how much money they spend buying finished products. Once you see gallium nitride as the real battlefield, a pattern emerges. The winners aren't just those with better pilots or better slogans. They're the ones with stronger factories, deeper supply chains, and the ability to build advanced systems again and again. And that leads to an even bigger realization. Wars are not decided by speeches or pride. They are decided by industrial power. That's the next piece of this story. History is brutally consistent on one point. Wars are not won by courage alone. They are won by factories. During World War II, many soldiers on all sides fought bravely. Courage was everywhere. But bravery didn't decide the outcome. Production did. The countries that could build more tanks, more planes, more ships, faster and cheaper, eventually overwhelmed those that couldn't. A soldier's skill matters, but only if replacements, ammunition, and spare parts keep coming. Think of war like a long-distance race. Talent helps at the start, but stamina wins in the end. Industrial power is stamina. This is why morale collapses when equipment is clearly inferior. If soldiers know their tools are outdated, hard to replace, or unreliable, confidence drops. Every loss feels permanent. Every mistake feels fatal. On the other hand, when troops trust their equipment and know it can be repaired or replaced quickly, they fight with far more confidence. This logic applies directly to South Asia. Pakistan's Air Force operates fewer aircraft, but its confidence comes from systems that are integrated and sustainable. Its pilots know their jets, missiles, and sensors were designed to work together. They also know replacements and upgrades come from a stable supply relationship. India's situation is different. It relies heavily on imported platforms from multiple countries, each with its own parts, software limits, and political conditions. These systems are expensive, slow to replace, and difficult to upgrade under pressure. In a real conflict, that creates fragility. A high-cost aircraft with a fragile supply chain is like a luxury sports car in a desert war zone. It may look impressive, but once it breaks down, it becomes a liability. This is the moment where the story fully changes. It's no longer about which jet is better, it's about which country can sustain modern warfare, and that depends on factories, energy, logistics, and industrial depth, not speeches or pride. Once you see war this way, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who actually controls the materials and supply chains that modern weapons depend on? That takes us beyond South Asia and straight into the global power hierarchy. By now, it should be clear that modern weapons don't begin on the battlefield. They begin in mines, refineries, and factories. And this is where the global balance of power quietly reveals itself. At the center of this system are rare earth elements. Despite the name, they aren't mythical, but they are extremely hard to process. These materials are essential for missiles, radar systems, electric motors, precision guidance, and advanced electronics. Without them, modern militaries simply don't function. China dominates this space. It controls a large share of global rare earth mining and, more importantly, an even larger share of processing and refining capacity. That second part matters more. Mining is useless if you can't turn raw material into usable components. This dominance creates leverage. When supply chains are disrupted, through sanctions, trade wars, or export controls, the effects ripple outward. Even advanced economies feel it. Civilian industries struggle first, but military industries feel it next. You've already seen hints of this in the real world. Western companies have openly acknowledged supply chain stress. Even electric vehicle makers have warned that rare earth controls affect production timelines. If civilian manufacturers feel the pressure, defense contractors feel it even more, because they rely on tighter tolerances and more specialized materials. This exposes a hard truth. Sanctions only work if you control the supply chain. If you don't, sanctions become self-inflicted wounds. Factories slow down, costs rise, production delays multiply. That's why modern power isn't just about alliances or military bases. It's about who controls inputs, metals, energy, chemicals, and manufacturing capacity. Press conferences don't produce missiles. Power grids and machine tools do. Once you understand this, global military strength looks very different. It's not about who talks the loudest or spends the most per unit. It's about who can keep producing when pressure rises. And this brings the story back to one country in particular, because the same industrial logic shaping global power also explains the deeper problems inside India itself. That's where we go next. By this point, the pattern should be clear. Military problems don't appear out of nowhere. They grow out of economic and industrial foundations. And this is where India's deeper challenge emerges. For more than a decade, India has projected the image of a future superpower. Speeches promised rapid industrialization, leadership in manufacturing, dominance in technology, and a leap into advanced sectors like artificial intelligence, green energy, and electric vehicles. On paper, it sounded like a fast track to greatness. But the numbers tell a quieter story. India's manufacturing share of GDP has remained stuck at around the mid-teens for years. In some periods, it has even fallen. That means the economy still relies heavily on services and agriculture, not large-scale industrial production. This matters because high-tech industries don't float in the air. They sit on top of factories, supply chains, and skilled industrial labor. You can think of it like trying to build a skyscraper without pouring concrete. The design may look impressive, but the structure can't hold. Take electric vehicles as an example. EVs aren't just cars. They are batteries, power electronics, motors, sensors, and software. Countries that lead in EVs control the entire chain, from raw materials to final assembly. Without battery chemistry, semiconductor fabrication, and precision manufacturing, EV leadership is just marketing. The same logic applies to military power. Buying advanced weapons does not create capability if the country cannot maintain, upgrade, or replace them independently. Imported systems look strong in peacetime, but they reveal weakness under pressure. This is why the problems we've discussed aren't isolated failures. They are systemic outcomes of an economy that talks about high-tech ambition without first building the industrial base required to sustain it. And once you recognize that, the final question becomes unavoidable. What happens if rhetoric continues to replace reality, especially when real conflict escalates? That's where this story ends. History shows something unforgiving. Reality is patient, but it never forgets. You can delay consequences with slogans, ceremonies, and imported prestige. But eventually, reality sends the bill. Modern warfare exposes this faster than almost anything else. Missiles don't care about speeches, radars don't respond to optimism, supply chains don't run on confidence. When conflict begins, what matters is brutally simple: what you can produce, repair, and replace under pressure. This is why the gap we've discussed is so dangerous. It's not about a single jet, a single incident, or a single rivalry. It's about a mismatch between ambition and capacity. When a country believes it has arrived, before it has built the foundations to sustain that position, every shock becomes destabilizing. Industrial power is slow to build and fast to expose when it's missing. You can't improvise semiconductor fabs during a crisis. You can't rush rare earth processing plants into existence. You can't substitute deep manufacturing ecosystems with emergency imports when borders tighten and priorities shift. This is the real lesson behind the Rafale, behind radar performance, behind supply chains, and behind global power shifts. Strength isn't what you display, it's what you can endure. And that's why the future of power will not be decided by announcements or acquisitions, but by something far less glamorous. Factories that run non-stop, engineers who know their systems end-to-end, energy that stays online, and supply chains that don't break when pressure rises. In the end, nations don't lose because they lack courage. They lose because they mistake image for capacity. And when that mistake meets reality, the outcome is never subtle.